My mother-in-law tossed a heavy set of keys onto the counter and told me I was now solely responsible for her bedridden, paralyzed brother for the next 3 weeks while she and my husband flew to Hawaii. Dashiell refused to look me in the eye as he loaded their bags, treating me like an unpaid nurse in my own home. They thought they had trapped me. But the moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I felt the weight of something they didn't know I was carrying. The original property deed, resting safely inside my leather bag, proving this entire estate belonged exclusively to me. I walked into the dark guest room expecting to check on an invalid. The bed was empty. A man was standing fully upright by the window, calmly pulling something small from his coat pocket. He turned toward me with sharp, alert eyes, nothing like the frail stranger they'd carried in on a stretcher that morning. He held up an encrypted flash drive between 2 fingers, stepped forward, and whispered 6 words that completely flipped the board. "They don't know I'm listening. My name is Aloan Farrington. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior financial analyst. For 6 years, I carried my entire family on my back while my husband played the devoted partner, completely unaware that behind my quiet nature was a woman who audited every single cent they ever touched. For 6 years, I was the load-bearing wall of the Delacroix family, keeping everything standing while everyone else took the credit. When I married Dashiell, I believed I was joining a family that valued hard work and mutual respect. I had built a successful career as a senior financial analyst, managing risk portfolios worth tens of millions of dollars. Naturally, I brought that same discipline into my personal life. My earnings were substantial, and because Dashiell's income as a mid-level real estate agent was notoriously unpredictable, I willingly took on the financial heavy lifting. I paid off the mortgage on our primary residence, covered our health insurance, and funded every major expense without hesitation. At first, my generosity felt like partnership, but slowly, subtly, the boundary between helping my family and being exploited completely dissolved. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, was a woman who lived perpetually beyond her means, maintaining a grand lifestyle funded entirely by my labor. It started with minor requests, an overdue utility bill here, an emergency car repair there. Soon, those minor requests turned into a monthly allowance disguised as family support. Every month, without fail, $4,500 left my private account to cover Beatrice's country club memberships, high-end grocery bills, and boutique shopping sprees. Over 6 years, that quiet drain totaled nearly $500,000. Dashiell did not just enable his mother, he actively protected her entitlement. Whenever I brought up the unbalanced budget, he would wrap his arm around my waist, lower his voice, and weaponize emotional gaslighting. He would tell me that I was being overly analytical, that I was viewing my own family through the cold lens of a spreadsheet instead of with love. He insisted that his mother had sacrificed everything for him and that as a wealthy professional, it was my moral duty to support her. Meanwhile, Dashiell's own commission checks mysteriously vanished into private investments he refused to discuss, claiming he was building a surprise safety net for our future. The disrespect was not just financial, it was deeply personal. Every holiday was an exercise in systematic humiliation. I would spend 3 days preparing elaborate dinners for 12 people, purchasing expensive wines and gourmet ingredients with my own money. Yet, as soon as the family sat down, Beatrice would find a way to undermine me. She would make subtle, cutting remarks about my career, implying that a woman who spent 40 hours a week in an office was failing her husband at home. She would publicly praise Dashiell for his patience, while ignoring the fact that the house we were sitting in, the food on the table, and the clothes on her back were all paid for by my salary. When Beatrice's brother Cormac was suddenly brought into our lives 3 months ago, the narrative was painted in tragic brushes. Beatrice claimed that Cormac had suffered a devastating neurological event that left him completely paralyzed and nonverbal. She moved him into our main floor guest suite, claiming she needed a safe space for his medical equipment. I hired private home health aides, covered his specialized nutrition, and personally coordinated his care, believing I was helping a vulnerable man in his final years. Neither Dashiell nor Beatrice ever thanked me. In fact, they treated my home like a private medical resort, barging in at all hours, demanding catering, and treating me like an uncompensated housekeeper. Whenever I tried to discuss Cormac's long-term care plan, Dashiell would dismiss me, claiming I lacked compassion. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and constantly made to feel like the villain for simply asking for basic boundaries. I was living with 2 parasites who mistook my quiet nature for weakness, completely oblivious to the fact that every micro-injustice was being meticulously documented. The morning after Dashiell and Beatrice left for Hawaii, I sat at my kitchen island with a steaming cup of black coffee while Cormac sat across from me, looking as alert and capable as any man 20 years younger. The story he told me over the next hour stripped away every last remaining illusion I had about my marriage. Cormac was not paralyzed, nor was he nonverbal. He was a retired corporate auditor who had discovered that Beatrice and Dashiell were attempting to systematically steal his late wife's estate. When he confronted them 3 months ago, they threatened to have him declared mentally incompetent unless he surrendered his power of attorney. Realizing he was outmaneuvered, Cormac played the only card he had left. He feigned a sudden neurological collapse, locked his faculties behind a wall of silence, and let them transfer him to my home, knowing that my reputation as a sharp, unyielding financial analyst made my house the safest place to gather evidence without raising suspicion. He pushed the encrypted flash drive across the polished counter toward me. Inside was a complete ledger of hidden transactions, recorded audio files, and scanned legal documents that Beatrice and Dashiell had been assembling behind my back. At 5 a.m., while the house was entirely silent, I opened my laptop and initiated a comprehensive forensic audit of my own accounts. As a senior risk analyst, I know exactly where people try to hide numbers when they think no one is watching. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. First, I examined our joint household account. Dashiell had set up 4 recurring automated transfers that routed funds into a shell corporation registered in Delaware under his mother's maiden name. Over the last 8 months alone, $84,000 meant for property taxes and home maintenance had been funneled directly into this entity. But that was just the surface. Digging deeper into our mortgage portal, I discovered an application for a second line of credit on our estate, a $250,000 home equity loan. Attached to the digital file was a scanned signature page bearing my name. The handwriting was a precise, practiced forgery of my signature, submitted 3 weeks prior and currently pending final release. Dashiell had leveraged my spotless credit score and our home's equity to secure cash for a commercial property purchase in his mother's name. Next, I logged into my personal investment portal to check my primary trust portfolio. Beatrice and Dashiell had executed a quiet, insidious maneuver. They had submitted a fraudulent petition to the county clerk claiming I was experiencing cognitive decline due to severe burnout, attaching altered medical notes from a corrupt private clinic. Their goal was to trigger a spendthrift clause that would freeze my independent control over the trust and transfer temporary administrative authority to Dashiell as my legal spouse. Finally, Cormac played an audio file recorded on his phone just 4 days earlier. Dashiell's voice came through the speakers, crisp and utterly devoid of affection. He was laughing with his mother, boasting about how my quiet nature and obsession with keeping the peace made me the perfect target. Beatrice's voice followed, cold and dismissive, remarking that once the Hawaii trip was over and Cormac was quietly transferred to a state-run long-term facility, they would serve me with divorce papers, keeping the estate and leaving me with the debts. Sitting in the dim morning light, I felt no anger, no tears, and no panic. The emotional fog that had blinded me for 6 years evaporated instantly, replaced by the icy clarity I used when breaking down failing corporate assets. They thought they were playing a game of emotional manipulation against a fragile woman. They had no idea they had just handed an expert analyst every piece of evidence required to execute a total financial execution. I printed out 42 pages of bank statements, forged signatures, and corporate registries, organizing them into a red binder. Then, with Cormac watching approval in his eyes, I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. One to my estate attorney and one to the head of financial fraud at our primary lending institution. The trap was set, and the hunt had officially begun. The moment I canceled the automated transfers and flagged the fraudulent equity loan for criminal investigation, the immediate backlash was swift and ruthless. Beatrice and Dashiell, sitting on a beach in Hawaii, realized within hours that their endless supply of unearned money had suddenly dried up. The initial warning shot came when Beatrice's luxury resort credit card was declined at an upscale restaurant, prompting an avalanche of frantic messages. My phone erupted with notifications. A total of 14 missed calls from Dashiell filled my screen before the text messages started flooding in. At first, Dashiell attempted his signature tactic of gentle condescension and romantic gaslighting. He sent long messages claiming there must be a glitch in the banking system, asking me to fix it immediately so his mother would not feel embarrassed in front of her friends. He reminded me how hard his mother was working to relax and how cruel it was of me to cause unnecessary drama over minor clerical details while they were thousands of miles away. When I responded with a single, calm sentence stating that all accounts were undergoing a mandatory risk audit and would remain locked until further notice, the tone shifted from pseudo-affectionate to outright aggression. Within 2 hours, Beatrice launched a coordinated campaign of character assassination across our extended family chat, which included 12 relatives. She posted emotional, tear-filled paragraphs claiming that I had suffered a sudden mental breakdown brought on by work stress. She wrote that my cold, calculating nature had finally driven me over the edge, leading me to cut off funding for her brother's essential life support medical care out of pure spite. She painted herself as a devoted mother and sister who was being held hostage financially by an unhinged, heartless daughter-in-law. Messages from aunts, cousins, and family friends began pouring in, accusing me of elder abuse and cold-hearted greed. Aunts who had never once contributed a single dollar to Cormac's care sent voice notes shaming me, invoking the memory of Dashiell's deceased father and telling me that I was destroying the family name. Dashiell then called me directly, his voice tight with fake concern and concealed rage. He did not ask about my well-being. Instead, he demanded that I immediately unlock the accounts and upload my digital signature to clear the equity loan. He told me that my behavior was proving every concern his mother had ever voiced about me. He insisted that I was paranoid, highly unstable, and clearly incapable of managing our household finances rationally. He threatened to cut his trip short, fly back, and file an emergency court order to place me under a temporary psychiatric hold if I did not restore their access by sunset. I listened to his entire rant in complete silence, holding the phone away from my ear while Cormac sat nearby, taking precise notes on every threat made during the call. Dashiell mistook my silence for submission, ending the call with a firm ultimatum: unlock the funds or face the destruction of my reputation and my marriage. They believed that public shame and emotional terrorism would force me to surrender, as it had so many times in the past. They did not realize that every desperate text, every manipulative voice note, and every public accusation in the family chat was being exported, time-stamped, and archived into my legal dossier. They were digging their own legal grave, completely blind to the reality that I was no longer defending myself. I was preparing to execute a precise, irreversible financial counterstrike. The true turning point arrived on Thursday morning, not through a courtroom order, but through a physical briefcase Cormac pulled out from the hidden bottom of his wardrobe. While Dashiell and Beatrice were busy sending toxic messages from their beach resort, Cormac and I spent 4 hours sitting at my dining table, aligning our legal strategies like two seasoned forensic auditors dismantling a corrupt syndicate. Cormac was far more than just a survivor of his sister's manipulation. He was an expert witness with decades of institutional knowledge. Before Beatrice convinced the family that he was deteriorating, Cormac had spent 30 years as a senior corporate auditor for federal banking systems. He knew every legal loophole, every trick dishonest individuals use to conceal assets, and precisely how to trigger irrevocable institutional locks. He laid out a thick binder filled with original financial records, certified bank statements, and notarized affidavits that he had spent the last 2 years quietly assembling. He revealed that Beatrice's pattern of financial parasitism was not new. 8 years ago, she had liquidated their late mother's life insurance policy using a forged power of attorney, driving Cormac's private accounting firm into forced restructuring to cover the tax liabilities she left behind. When Beatrice tried to repeat the exact same scheme with Cormac's personal retirement trust 6 months ago, he realized that simply saying no would not stop her. She was ruthless, persuasive, and completely unburdened by guilt. That was when Cormac decided to play the ultimate long game. He faked his physical collapse, allowed Beatrice to move him into my home, and used his supposed nonverbal state to record every conversation held in the house. He handed me a sleek black audio recorder containing over 40 hours of clear, high-definition digital recordings. Among the files were private discussions between Dashiell and Beatrice in our living room, explicitly detailing how they planned to use my immaculate credit rating to secure loans for their private ventures, offload the debt onto my sole name, and eventually force me out of my own property. More importantly, Cormac provided the key piece of evidence I needed to activate a rare legal mechanism: the original Spendthrift Irrevocable Trust Agreement established by Dashiell's late grandfather. This document contained a specific ironclad clause that had gone unnoticed by Dashiell and Beatrice for years. Under Section 9 of the Trust Charter, any attempt by a beneficiary or their spouse to leverage estate property through fraudulent representation or unauthorized secondary encumbrances resulted in the immediate automatic forfeiture of all discretionary distribution rights. Furthermore, it granted the primary trustee, who happened to be Cormac himself, the absolute authority to freeze all linked sub-accounts and reclaim estate assets in real time without prior judicial notice. Looking at the signed documents spread across my table, the last remnants of doubt left my mind. I was no longer dealing with a complex marital dispute or a chaotic family misunderstanding. I was holding irrefutable proof of bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Cormac looked at me, his eyes sharp and steady, and said, "Eloan, you have spent 6 years trying to buy peace from people who only respect power. Stop negotiating with people who are actively trying to destroy you. Hand these files to your counsel, activate the spendthrift clause, and let the law do what it was designed to do." With Cormac standing beside me as a fully capable, legally sound co-trustee, my legal team prepared the final strike. We drafted an emergency petition, filed the forensic audit with the state banking authority, and prepared to execute a silent, devastating financial checkmate. If your own family spent years draining your hard-earned money and secretly tried to steal your home, would you give them a second chance or execute a total financial checkmate without warning? On Friday afternoon, while Beatrice and Dashiell were celebrating what they believed was a successful emotional ambush, my legal team and I activated the spendthrift clause. Through Cormac's authority as primary trustee and my verified audit of identity theft, the financial locks triggered automatically in real time. We did not wait for a court date or engage in dramatic screaming matches. We executed a precise, silent administrative strike. At 7:30 p.m. Hawaiian time, Beatrice and Dashiell were sitting at an exclusive beachfront restaurant hosting a group of luxury resort guests to show off their elevated status. They had ordered $1,000 bottles of wine and elite tasting menus, fully expecting my personal credit card to cover the balance as it always had. When the waiter brought the bill, Dashiell handed over the black platinum card linked to my account. He had no idea that 3 minutes earlier, sitting in my quiet study 6,000 miles away, I had opened my banking application, flagged the card as stolen, and triggered an immediate freeze on every linked sub-account. The waiter returned moments later, accompanied by the restaurant manager, informing Dashiell in front of his guests that the card had been hard declined for suspected fraud. Smirking, Beatrice pulled out her secondary corporate card, the one funded by the automated monthly transfers I had already canceled. It was declined instantly. Dashiell tried his personal credit line, completely unaware that the spendthrift invocation had automatically frozen all assets tied to the Delacroix name pending the federal fraud investigation. Panic erupted at their table. As their wealthy acquaintances watched in utter astonishment, Dashiell frantically logged into his mobile banking app, only to see a flashing red alert: accounts frozen by court mandate. With no cash, no valid credit cards, and an unpaid bill exceeding $2,000, the restaurant management refused to let them leave, calling local authorities to handle the situation. While they were being detained by police in Hawaii for theft of services, my legal team was executing the final phase back home. Under the activated spendthrift provisions, Dashiell's legal rights to our estate were instantly voided due to attempted unauthorized encumbrance. At 8 a.m. the following morning, a private security team and a licensed locksmith arrived at my property. Every exterior lock was replaced and high-definition security cameras were installed along the perimeter. When Dashiell and Beatrice finally managed to secure an emergency wire transfer from a distant relative to pay their legal fees in Hawaii and flew back 3 days later, they arrived at my estate expecting to demand an explanation. Instead, they found the massive iron gates locked tight. Dashiell walked up to the intercom, his face pale and eyes bloodshot, pounding on the metal bars. I did not go down to meet him. I simply watched through the security monitor as my attorney stepped out onto the driveway, holding 2 red folders containing 32 pages of bank statements, forged signatures, and criminal fraud indictments. Through the gate speakers, my attorney's voice was cold and professional. He informed Dashiell that a temporary restraining order had been issued, that divorce proceedings had officially been filed, and that all evidence of forgery had been forwarded to the district attorney's office. Beatrice stood on the pavement in shock, her arrogance completely shattered as she realized that her monthly $4,500 allowance was gone forever, and her son was facing potential criminal charges for fraud. Cormac walked up beside me at the window, holding his cup of tea, watching as the local police cruisers pulled up to enforce the trespass warning. They had spent 6 years treating me like a passive asset to be exploited. They never realized that when you back an analyst into a corner, she does not panic. She simply recalculates the numbers and liquidates the liability. 6 months after the locks were changed and the spendthrift clause was executed, quiet finally returned to my life. The legal aftermath was swift, systematic, and completely devoid of emotional compromise. Faced with undeniable forensic evidence, forged signatures, and Cormac's detailed audit trail, Dashiell had no choice but to accept a full, uncontested divorce settlement. Under the terms of the agreement, he signed over any lingering claims to our estate, surrendered his rights to shared marital assets, and accepted full financial responsibility for the private debts he had accumulated behind my back. To avoid serving state prison time for bank fraud and identity theft, Dashiell entered into a formal pre-trial diversion program. He was forced to leave his high-end real estate network, sell his personal luxury vehicle, and take an entry-level position at a local commercial property firm just to meet his mandatory monthly court obligations. Beatrice's reality underwent an even more dramatic collapse. Without my monthly $4,500 allowance to fund her lavish lifestyle, her illusion of wealth vanished overnight. Unable to maintain the lease on her upscale residence or pay off her boutique credit cards, she was forced to downsize into a modest one-bedroom rental on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in over a decade, she had to navigate the cold realities of a strict household budget, entirely stripped of the influence she once used to manipulate those around her. Cormac used his recovered inheritance to establish an independent financial literacy foundation, dedicated to helping vulnerable individuals protect their assets from domestic exploitation and predatory family members. He continues to live in a quiet apartment nearby, and we still meet every Sunday morning for coffee, reflecting on the precise operation that restored our freedom. Standing on my back patio on a clear morning, holding a fresh cup of coffee in total peace, I often think about the years I wasted trying to earn the approval of people who only saw me as a resource to be harvested. I spent 6 years mistaking my own endurance for strength, believing that taking on endless burdens made me a devoted wife. The greatest lesson I learned was simple yet profound. Those who praise you for being the load-bearing wall of the family are often the very same people who decided they would never carry their own weight. Generosity without boundaries is not love. It is self-sabotage. And the exact moment you shut down their unearned bank account is the exact moment you finally reclaim your life. When someone tries to convince you that you are a stranger in your own home, you do not argue. You simply show them whose name is signed on the title.